Erik. We're going to have, I'm sure, what's going to be a great conversation. Lots of insights that a lot of our community, our mentees, will find valuable. So before we get started, how about you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Erik Reid. Actually, technically go by Erik Colthirst-Reid if you're looking for me on Facebook or anything like that. So I'm a product director at a IT research and advisory firm. What that essentially means is I'm the owner of a certain product within this space, and essentially it's IT professional services. I manage a team that is responsible for the sale, the scoping, the delivery coordination of a certain set of consulting products. That's me on the professional side. I've been doing that for the past 4 or 5 years that I've been with this organization. That company's called Infotech. Outside of that, I'm a dad, I'm a husband. I'm father of an 18-month-old little girl, Zara, rambunctious, clever, running and climbing, jumping on everything.
Very active.
Very active, very, very active. And I've been outside of school for 5 years now at this point. Went to school for initially history, ended up translating over to do an English degree alongside a business degree, and graduated with 2 dual honor degrees.
Right, and that in and of itself sounds like a story. So very different to what you studied compared to where you are today. You're in more of an IT field, IT professional services. So how about you tell us a bit more about that journey and how you managed to transition from what you studied to now your focus in professional career? What was your first sort of job, and how did it go from there?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start just as I was ending high school and kind of where the interest in history came from. Initially, I had more of a math interest. And then I veered away from that. Certain events just in my life, for instance, so grade 10, my dad actually left our family. And kind of around that same time, it was almost kind of like a switch went off for me, and I switched from these math and sciences focus to more of these arts and humanities focus, and that really became kind of my passion in high school. So going into university, I thought that I really want to study history. I want to understand history. Heroes for me growing up were civil rights leaders like MLK, Malcolm X. I really appreciated just the way that they moved society forward, and I really thought that if there's something that I want to do, that's what I want to be able to do. It's that, being in that space. So I went into university for history, thinking that would be a good platform. At the same time, I applied for early entry to this business school, Ivy Business School in London, Ontario. Essentially, in my mind, the thinking behind that, and this has continued to be my thinking really, I'd only say that it's starting to change now, is that I wanted to open myself up to as many opportunities as possible. And you go to like any university website, and of course, all they're talking to you about is this will open you up to so many opportunities, career opportunities, speaking opportunities, leadership opportunities, etc. That's always their rhetoric to you. But I really saw that as being an option with Ivy, because you saw so many different diverse things that people were doing. Anyway, I go into my first year of university. I find history interesting. It's a good program, but what really caught my attention and my interest was English literature. I found it was much more interdisciplinary. I found that you could take a lot more angles to the text, and as a result, you just got a lot more exposure. So whether it was philosophy, whether it was psychology, whether it was sociology, all of these things had different inputs into the text that you were reading from any given era, right? Whether it was poetry or whether it was short stories or novels. Now the way that the advanced entry works for Ivy at Western is you spend your first 2 years in a program of your choice, and then the third year and fourth year you go and you do your business degree. You maintain that advanced entry so long as you've maintained a certain average. So I was able to do that in English. That was also part of the reason I went over to English, because I just was getting higher marks than I was in history. So I ended up going into the HBA program at Ivy, the business program. And I decided that, hey, I really want to stick with English as well. I see this as a passion of mine. And I think it's important that I finish it because I've started it. Now, I was by no means obligated to do so, but I just thought it was more interesting. Business was very number-centric and very result-centric. It was very black and white, it seemed to me. At the time, I think that less so now. Whereas English just had so much to explore in the language, the creativity involved in it, just the way that you form ideas and communicate those. That was really something that captivated my attention. So I ended up doing the dual degree between the two. Now, when I finished my first year at Ivy, so that'd be my third year in university, I ended up getting what I guess you'd call my first professional job as an internship between year 3 and year 4. I was working at this facilities management consulting firm. Now, if you're familiar with facilities management, and you're probably not, like virtually nobody is, it's all about the operations and facilities that keep buildings running, right? So your HVAC, your boiler, the pipes that run through the building, and essentially the maintenance of all of those things. Well, you look at the facilities management, and this is especially true for large downtown centers, metropolitan centers. There's a lot that goes into maintaining these buildings and just keeping them running on a regular basis, especially when you get into LEED certification and everything like that, as the standards and the expectations of how these buildings are operated and the efficiency with which they're operated, all of that increases, right? So I ended up going into this world that I knew nothing about, essentially, is what I'm trying to tell you. And initially I was supposed to be what was essentially a project associate, but largely doing a lot of copyright or technical writing, I should say. Technical writing for their RFP documents and drafting new RFP documents. I ended up getting to be involved in some different projects that they were working on, and I found that really interesting. Diving into something that I didn't know about, but understanding, why it was important and what factors of that were going to convince executives or people, stakeholders involved in that project who had to make decisions. What was going to influence them to make the decision towards our company or towards another, right? So I finished off that internship. Really great experience. I go into my 4th year of Ivy and post grad, and I'm not sure if any of your mentees, Chris, would be familiar with Ivy, but if any of them are in any sort of business program, you go into the 4th year of your program, and it is recruiting. That's all your focus is.
Try and find that next job, right?
Trying to find that next job so that when you graduate, you don't have to worry about what you're going to be doing. Because I had opted to do the dual degree, that meant I was going to be doing a 5th year as well. So in 4th year, I see everyone going through this recruiting process who otherwise was in my year. And I get the opportunity to keep my nose in books for reading novels, reading short stories alongside my English degree and alongside my business degree. So, I kind of got to have a window into that recruitment before it was really my time. Then at the end of fourth year, I worked, and I didn't mention this for my first internship. Actually, it was a friend that got me the job. It was her friend's dad who was the president of the company, and he said that he was looking for English writers with a business sense. And I was like, me, please. So then anyway, kind of similar thing happens this time around, coming out of fourth year. A friend of mine says that, hey, he's been doing project work for this sales consulting organization. I say organization, but it's really just this one guy plus a couple IB students that he's hired to support him. He's basically trying to build out this consulting practice that he can then step away from. So looking at talent from a business school is really helpful for him, because they're going to try to figure out how to basically do the work as efficiently as possible that he's asking them to do. So I meet with him a couple times, kind of some casual interviews, and I end up doing some project work for him over the summer. And that was basically my second quote unquote professional job. A dive into sales in an interesting way from a consulting perspective. From a consulting perspective, you're doing much more market research analysis. Because then it's not so much a matter of, what are the tactics that are going to be proficient or going to be effective in any one individual given sales conversation. That's not what, my boss at that time was looking for me. He's asking me to do market research to help him understand what does the U.S. banking industry look like, for instance, as he speaks with this client, and how is he going to use that to frame his conversation, right? Again, totally different direction from this facilities, HVAC, operations management, now the sales consulting focus. Different set of skills in a sense, but also similar work, problem solving, right? Then coming into fifth year, now my focus is recruiting. Now my focus is getting a job. But at the same time, it was that summer. And I suppose I left this detail out. So coming out of fourth year, I ended up going into this extracurricular program called Leading Education and Development in Emerging Regions. Essentially what it is you go and you teach first-time entrepreneurs in different places around the world, and largely developing countries, but not quite developing countries. It can be any sort of gamut. It's basically where people are in need of more formalized business skills, right? And it's not so much teaching as it is coaching and working with those people. Recognizing that you're not an expert yourself. You're in university. So I go and I do this program in Russia that summer. That's why I did this kind of offset sales consulting work. This served me really well going into my fifth year as I went into the recruiting process, because now all of a sudden, I had this kind of odd but eccentric smattering of consulting-like experience, where I was also showing leadership skills as well. So I ended up having a few different interviews with a few different consulting organizations. And at this point, consulting really became my focus. As I guess it really had been that whole time. To me, that seemed like the broadest field where I'd be exposed to the broadest set of problems and experiences, and I'd be able to use that as a launching pad into whatever it is that I wanted to do. That I wasn't all that clear yet on. And I ended up having, 2 interviews. So I ended up going into interviews with Infotech, and I ended up going into interviews with Sun Life Financial. Sun Life Financial wasn't quite the consulting route. It was an account executive role, which I don't think I really understood the role, to be honest, as I was going through it. It was going to be some sort of rotation program where I'd get to see different areas of the organization, but I knew that I was going to have ownership over certain business relationships. And, I ended up going through quite a few different interviews with them. Oh, and there was a third job alongside that. I was also interested in the lecturer role at Western, which HBA grads have, kind of early access to. Again, all three totally different things. Like one was really a sales role, one was teaching, and one was this consulting analyst role. But really, Infotech's consulting analyst role was supposed to be 50% research and 50% client facing. It's not quite consulting, it's advisory. You'd have an opportunity to participate in the advisory services. And it was in this niche IT space, which I didn't really know anything about. I've always been, I'd say, above average in my savviness with computers, but I didn't dive into it like a lot of friends did. I wasn't doing any sort of programming or anything like that. I knew that people use C++ as a language in certain workspaces, but I didn't know much beyond that, right? Basically, between the three of these, Infotech really seemed to have this. It seemed to check some of the different boxes for me. One, it was a smaller organization. I wanted a smaller organization because, you always get the sense that you go into a larger organization. Yes, it's going to look better on a resume, but are you going to be more of a cog in the wheel? What's your autonomy look like? I was really interested in what type of autonomy can I have in my role, and how can I impact the organization early? So Infotech kind of checked that box for me. I knew I'd be able to wear multiple hats. It had this consulting element to it. It had this writing element to it as well, in that it was research oriented. If I didn't mention this before, English obviously was always a passion of mine. The reason for that was because I always want to be an author. And I don't know if you heard me change my tense there, but I changed it from past tense to present tense as I said that, because it's still true. I still want to be an author. So I saw it as, setting me up in the right direction. It was just going to have the right inputs into my development, my learning, my experience, that it would position me well, whenever I decide to change my mind or whenever I decide to move on to something else. So I go into this consulting analyst role. It is primarily research. You tend to do some advisory over the phone with members. Depending on how good you are at that, you get more and more of it. If you're more research oriented, then you're going to plug more into research. I ended up having an affinity to speaking with clients over the phone, pretty early once I had gotten some research under my belt. So I started being quite active in an advisory capacity, like 7 to 8 months in, which is weird, because I'm not an IT professional. I'm not an IT practitioner. Didn't have experience in that sense. But you start doing research in these different spaces and you realize that, hey, I actually do have something to add. I do have something to contribute here. And it doesn't actually take that much time, but it does take some focus, some just work, a little bit of elbow grease there. And when I was a year into the role, then I started getting leveraged by the company for some consulting work as well. I've managed probably about 5 different projects on the research side over the span of that first year. And I got to work on 1 to 3 different consulting projects as well. Basically doing either Excel work, doing number crunching, doing report writing, or whatever it might be. And, what they're always looking for you, looking for from you, to see you as a candidate for this is really, I think for me, it was, my ability to listen, my ability to hear and draw connections, right? Draw connections to, okay, here's what the challenge is. Here's what the business implication is, right? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to communicate and convey, a clear understanding of that. And then what is the path forward from here, right? Like you need to be able to draw those dots. And over the course of that first year and a half at Infotech, I'd actually applied for 2 different roles because I saw these opportunities come up. One was to be a product manager for this workshops team. One was to be a research manager for small enterprise focused research. First came the product manager role. I was sitting next to the director for that team. He said, "Hey, you'd be a really great fit for this. I think that this makes a lot of sense for you. Like you have a real sales savvy, and you also have a quick, just a way of quickly picking up different topics and being able to speak to them on a technical level." I ended up applying for that role, and then there was an organizational change, and he was no longer going to be the director of the team. And he saw that there was going to be some flux for the team, and he said, "It's not a good time to join right now." And it was me and another guy that he had initially was telling, "Hey, apply for this, right? He ended up bypassing both of us because he said, "I don't want to bring you guys into this team right now. Now is not the right time, but apply later because more openings will come. Trust me on this. We're going to give it to these other 2 people, and that's fine. Don't worry about it." So I'm like, okay, Justin, all right. And then this SE research manager position came up, and my laser focus for this was basically, I want manager experience. I want manager experience before I move on from Infotech. And when you first get a job after university, you think that you're going to keep that job maybe 1-2 years, and then you're going to move on after that. So you want to try to soak as much experience out of that so you can pull that to somewhere else. I'm still here 5 years, by the way, 5.5 now. And I still really like it. So I see this SE research manager role, and I think to myself, here's my opportunity to get some management experience really early, great show advancement, speak with the director on that team. He tells me, I actually didn't speak with him was it after or before? He tells me that for roles like that, what you need to demonstrate is contribution beyond just yourself, right? So you can be an individual contributor, you can be a team contributor, you can be a department contributor, or you can be an organizational contributor. He said to me, right now, you're still operating really at the team contributor level. Once you're operating at a department contributor level, then you'll have more opportunity to advance to roles like this really quickly. So I see that, and it was after that I started supporting consulting projects, really driving on my calls and things like that. And then this product manager role gets posted again. Mind you, this was like 4 months later. It was maybe at most 6 months later. And at this point, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I just keep on working in this consulting role. Maybe I keep on working between consulting and research. I haven't had much time to work on these 2. Maybe I just, relax and I just grind on these. So I didn't apply for it initially. And then the VP of my practice told me, "Listen, Eric, let's go for a walk. You need to apply for this role. You should apply for this role. In fact, we want you to apply for this role. We think you're going to be a great fit for it." people in my company tend to use more colorful language than that. So, and then I apply for it, go through the interview process, end up taking that role. This is end of fall 2016. And I'm kind of catapulted into this role where I now have to know a lot more research beyond just my own. At this point, I'd written topics on topics like enterprise communication and collaboration, Office 365 migration, cloud strategy, but those weren't really top sellers for workshops. And workshops, mind you, are basically 1 week consulting engagements. Right? We're going to come in and we're going to work with you. That's the difference between a workshop and consulting. We're going to work with you through our methodology to basically bring you to a certain point in your project where we're accelerating this project for you. We're getting the major items through. And to kind of cut my rambling short here, or not short at all. So I was in that product manager role until February 2019, and now I've been in the director role. This team has seen a ton of growth since then. We were 3 people when I joined the team. We grew to as many as 7. And even if you count kind of the auxiliary members of the team, really 8 and 9. And now, and then we've recently gone through some change now where we've shrunk a little bit. So I'm the director of this team. I have 2 product managers underneath me. I have an operations person, and then I have 10 workshop specialists. It's kind of a funny name for them, but basically they're delivery resources. All they do is go out and deliver these workshops. They're individuals with 20, 25 plus years of IT practitioner experience. They're all basically on a CIO level. And they go and deliver these critical projects for our members. And that's kind of where I am now. I don't know if that was as long of an answer that you're
You know
expecting.
what? That's perfect. And that's why I just let you continue, because there's so many, I wrote down so many notes. There's so many different themes actually that you maybe unconsciously covered. And I'm just going to pick, and maybe we can delve into a few of those topics to discuss a bit further. So where do we start? Let's start at the beginning. So like you said, there was a lot of change in terms of even in university. So you thought you wanted to go down one path. You tried something else. You said one was more black and white, one was more colorful. Either way, you tried your hand at multiple different things. And when you first started, whether it's through internship, or even your first kind of jobs, you didn't have one thing set in mind and say, I'm going to turn down everything else unless it's this specific thing. You said, sounds interesting. Let's try it. So maybe a bit of a loaded question, but if you're going to analyze your starting, and when I say starting, I'm more talking about the step from, say, university to those first sorts of roles. Would you have done anything differently?
I think there's some parts of me that would, to your point, to the context that you provided even before, I didn't really have a clear focus as to what I wanted to do, right? I saw other individuals who came into Ivy or came into university with a really clear picture of what they wanted to do, and that just was not me. I was just interested in.
I want to stop you. The irony there, are those people in those places where they thought they were going to be?
In some cases, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I'd actually say, in the ones that are flashing to my mind right now, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But one of them, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to be a police officer, and he was just getting his university degree. So that actually, Matt.
Yeah, and he's a pilot now, right? Or flying planes? Yeah.
He's a pilot. He's an operations manager.
Yeah.
That's not at all where he is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But there's others, and this I think is especially true for investment bankers. I went to school with a lot of investment bankers. That's what they wanted to do coming in from high school. They knew that was what they wanted to do.
Okay.
And absolutely, they're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
but that wasn't me,
No.
you know? I think sometimes I think back and think if I had come in with more focus, then I could have really capitalized on opportunities like that and been more intentional with what I wanted to do. But I'm also really happy with, where I am. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the answer.
Well, I similarly have that same thought process too, and there's a saying I usually say that the foolish make plans in stone, but you don't really control what happens to you as of tomorrow a lot of the time. So you have to be open and flexible to some form of change and be willing to be agile enough to move with that change. Interesting. Okay, so another theme that I pulled out from what you shared with us, especially when you were starting out, networking. So a couple of your first opportunities, you said that you knew someone who had an opportunity and you put your hand up. So how much of a role would you say that, and maybe I shouldn't use the word networking because a lot of people shy away from that. They don't fully understand that. But how much of a role would you say different relationships or connections from people that played a part in your early success?
Yeah. I think you used the right word, relationships. Because networking can feel really awkward, I think, for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. It can feel a little bit too... It's a little bit too intentional in one direction. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm going to have this relationship with you for this purpose.
So you can give me something.
Yes, yeah. You'll give me something. And that was just not the case whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Like, even for each of these, it wasn't that they put this out to, like, a bunch of people. It just kind of happened organically. They knew that I was looking for something, mm-hmm. and they said, hey, there's actually a really cool opportunity here. I think you'd be great for it. Mm-hmm. It happened really organically. Mm-hmm. I think those are so important, I think that's the importance of, just good relationships and relationships for relationship's sake, and you're never expecting to, mm-hmm. to hear something from it. Mm-hmm. There's no expectation that someone owes you something or that someone ought to give you something or that you should ever quote unquote get something from that relationship other than just the quality of that relationship itself. Mm-hmm. And yet that comes, Mm-hmm. These were people that, I met as I went through university. I went through the HBA program, and I worked with them in some cases. I think it's really important to just, treat everybody as you would like to be treated yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think because of my approach to that with each one of these people, when they see something and they think of me, they bring it to me, mm-hmm. Which has been immensely, it's been an immense blessing. Mm-hmm.
And I like that. And it's very unassuming. You said it was people that you went to school with. It was people that you had that relationship with. So again, a lot of people think of this networking thing as, oh, I'm going to reach out to this senior vice president. I'm going to reach out to this director who I have no connection with, and I'm going to ask something of them. And that's networking. But sometimes it's just a matter of looking around. Who do you have those strongest connections with? Who do you have that, I'm going to say relationship again, but who do you have that rapport with that you can say, oh, yeah, I know this guy. We got on very well and we have this in connection. Yeah. Just catch up with them. What are they doing? Is there anything that you can do that can help them and potentially vice versa?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, I think... okay, I'm trying to draw together maybe an abstract idea here, but just empathy and curiosity go really long ways in relationships, right? Mm-hmm. You could reach out to an SVP. You could reach out to a VP. Mm-hmm. For instance, my one friend's younger brother reached out to me the other day mm-hmm. To talk with me about, roles at Infotech. And, he came from a position of just honest curiosity. He's just trying to learn. You know, it's not even that he's looking for a role specifically at Infotech.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking for advice, and he's looking for just, you know, how do I navigate this as I look for a consulting job, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a consulting director or anything like that. I don't have any special in with him in that sense, or for him in that sense. But he came with an honest curiosity, and I think that prompted empathy from my perspective. And you know, I want to help him as he, you know, asks some of those questions, because I think he's going to end up in a good place if he keeps asking those questions.
You're right. Yeah, I think intent is a key word there, right? And the recipient of those sorts of questions can clearly tell intent. Someone that's just wanting, you know, to get a leg up on a potential application process versus someone that wants to genuinely know what the steps that I take to you know, progress in my career. And yeah, maybe I did do a bit of a misspeak. I'm not saying in networking you shouldn't reach out to the likes of directors, VPs, etc. But it shouldn't be your only search. Do a bit of both. Don't neglect those relationships that you have and hold dear, and be willing to step out potentially, but with the right sort of intent, as opposed to trying to just take. It's about giving and taking and having that right intent. So thanks for that clarification. So actually, another thing that you spoke on when you were explaining your career journey, after you had your first couple of experiences or jobs, you came up with some form of criteria, and you said, "Great, there's this other opportunity that's becoming available. Does it cultivate my sort of interests, or would I be able to take what I want to do and be able to apply that in the job?" So you said that you still wanted to have some form of writing capability, you still wanted to have some form of consulting capability as well, and as long as it ticked those criteria, you were willing to do that. Now, how would you see that as a different philosophy or strategy to when you first started out? Did you have that same sort of criteria, or would you say that came later on once you built up some experience and were able to be a bit more selective on how you chose other opportunities?
Well, I think you got to try things. You know, like when you're starting out, you don't really know anything. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know what should actually inform that checklist. If you do know some things, you know, and you know some things that you like or you don't like, then, you know, let those things inform your checklist. That's not a bad thing, but it's also just important to try things. You know, one job that I didn't really mention. So in high school, at the end of high school, I took on this job with Vector Marketing, selling Cutco. It was a sales job, you know, direct sales.
I weirdly enough, I had a stint with Vector as well, and it was what was it you were selling?
Cutco, knives.
Knives. Okay, for us, we were selling car products, so like car wax, and things like that. So interesting. Okay. Anyway, continue.
I do this sales job. I was basically just looking for a job, man. I was in high school. I wanted some money for the summer, and you know, I wanted something better than like working at, I don't know, a restaurant and washing dishes. You know what I mean? I wanted something more meaningful than that. So I end up going for this posting that I see to go sit in on this job interview. Do the interview. I think they're pretty much hiring everyone.
Did you get a call like the same day or the next day?
Probably.
Yeah. They hired everyone.
And I was 17. They were only supposed to hire people that were 18 or older. But they're like, you know, like you just seem like a really.
You're so good. We make a special exception just for you.
I eat it up, and I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do this. Yeah. And you know, with jobs like this, and this isn't to disparage Vector Marketing. I think they actually have a really awesome product, and I learned a lot from them. But with products like this, you have to buy the product to start out with, right? So that means laying down like $200 or $250 or whatever it was. And I have my mom drive me there that weekend, or I don't know, it was a few days later. I'm like, Mom, can you just drive me to this place? Like, it's this new job. I've got to buy some material here, and then I'm going to be off, and I'm going to be trying to sell some of this. I think it's a really awesome product. I don't think it'll be difficult to sell. Wait till you see it. Mm-hmm. My mom, my aunt, my grandma on the way there just telling me like, Eric, this doesn't seem right. Like, what type of job is this that it's going to ask you to pay money to start even doing the work? They're asking way too much. Don't do it. Don't do it. I'm like, no, I really want to do this. I believe in it. I think this is something that I'm going to be able to learn something from. And if at the end of the day I don't, then I've lost $250. Mm-hmm. But at least I tried it. Mm-hmm. Like I really want to try this. So I go and I do it. My first week, I sell $1,000 worth of these knives. Wow. $1,200 actually. Mm-hmm. Within that first summer, I sold $12,000 worth of those knives. I started in June, went till August, and I made like certain levels that they had, and I did really well. Like, it's in-home demonstrations selling people on knives, and you have to get referrals from each, family member or friend or neighbor that you present this to, so that you can have more opportunities to go and sell in Cutco knives to other people. Mm-hmm. Some people are receptive. Some people are just absolute jerks. Mm-hmm. Even people that you didn't expect to be jerks. Mm-hmm. I went to this shop teacher, his house. I think someone referred him, called him and said, hey, like, have Eric come by and do this for you. And the whole time, like, he was just shutting me down and just like throwing objections at me. And then he ended up buying something at the end too. Mm-hmm. He was a big Henkel fan. Anyway, you run into experiences like that, and it made, for me at least, sales something that was really uncomfortable. Like, I really had to put myself in this uncomfortable position to constantly, try to win over people and, get them to buy what I was selling. And it was just this uncomfortable job. Then come the school year, my first year going into university, the manager at Vector Marketing, she was awesome. I really liked her. Her name was Lindsay. She wanted me to keep going and like keep on working towards this, and sell in my spare time. At this point, it felt like it was going to be a major effort to do that. So I wasn't sure if sales was really for me, despite actually doing really well that just over the course of that summer. Mm-hmm. And so to bring this full circle now, sales was something that I found uncomfortable. I thought I took this idea away from that if I went into sales again, or if I went into some sort of sales-oriented role, that, eventually it was going to get too tough for me and I was going to run away from it. I had this idea in my head that something was going to get too tough and I was going to run away from something in my, in a professional work place, in a professional work experience. And I went and I did this facilities management job. Didn't happen. Mm-hmm. I went and I did this sales consulting role. Didn't happen. And I was actually a little bit closer to sales again, but not like it was abstracted. Mm-hmm. Went and did this consulting analyst role. Didn't happen. And I took on this product manager role where I was going to be now very sales focused. Mm-hmm. Didn't happen at all. Ended up being, so not that first year, but the next year, and the year after that, being the person with the most sales, mm-hmm. the most revenue on the board, mm-hmm. supported for workshop sales. Mm-hmm. And it was by putting myself, even in something that I thought I had tested before, putting myself in an uncomfortable position where I saw opportunity, and just trying it out. And now sales is something that I see as a de facto of business. I see it as something that it is the language of business. It is how you produce value for others by understanding what their challenges are, what their needs are, and providing a solution, and making that really clear as to how you're going to do that, and then getting them to close. And then Seth Godin has this really interesting concept that, whenever you make a sale or whenever you attract someone towards your business or towards your firm's business, you're not really closing business, you're opening business, right? You're opening a relationship, you're opening an opportunity for, reciprocal value for both sides, right? We're providing a service that's going to contribute on for whatever your problems, whatever your challenges are, and you're transactionally paying us for it, but this is something that's enabling both of us to succeed.
Yeah, helping to solve people's problems, and like you said, money is just a transaction to finalize that. Yeah,
exactly.
Cool. So what I'm going to take away from that is especially early on in your career, don't shut things down. Try them. It might end up being crucial even for later on in your career, but try. And as you experience different things, you might find a better affinity or liking towards certain things, and then you can continue to repeat those things or do a sidestep from things that you don't necessarily like, and then you could continue growing in your career. So great lesson learned. Another thing I'm going to pull out again from your story. What seemed to be crucial, especially later on in your career, this idea or theme of mentorship or even sponsorship. So it seems like you had a few crucial leaders that were able to give you the behind the scenes, give you some form of encouragement, and at least say, "Oh, this might be for you." So could you share a bit more of how that has also potentially impacted your journey?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I have had that. I think sometimes I look back and I think to myself, who are my mentors, and were there mentors? But there absolutely are, just riddled throughout. So take this Lindsay, who's the manager for that area of vector marketing for Cutco. She was just full of encouragement for me, but also full of really direct feedback. But she told me that I had an affinity towards it. I don't want to say a talent for it, but I could do this and I could do it well. And then there's certain teachers that I had through school that really gave me a lot of positive encouragement and a lot of positive advice. I think sometimes in the moment, when you're receiving that, it feels kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. It's easy to brush off. It's easy to brush off that positive reinforcement. When people are telling you that you're doing a good job, but there's probably an opportunity to actually stop and listen to that, and like really internalize that and carry that forward to whatever it is that you're doing next. I think there's mentors everywhere. Like I think about. Sorry, I'll go one more diatribe here, but this will be a short one. I think about when I was 13 years old, I took over this kind of lawn care, landscaping help that we were giving this one elderly couple in our neighborhood over from my brother. It was the Abood family, Mr. and Mrs. Abood, and I'd go there every weekend, and then quite often throughout the week, all the way from spring through the fall, to make sure that their chickens, their eggs were picked, right? The chicken coops were cleaned, the yard was cut, the garden that they had was tended to and everything like that. And he had very specific ideas of how he wanted things done. And, he's someone who I saw as a mentor as well. Like you kind of make a mentor out of anybody. There's something to learn from anybody. Like he had a real eye for detail, and that's always stuck with me too.
Yeah, I agree. They could be a mentor, not just necessarily at work or professional, but throughout life, who is at a stage where they're able to impart wisdom, and are you open and receptive to receiving some of that wisdom and learning from it? Great. Okay, so we're going to transition. This is what I like to call an anchor question. And it's somewhat leadership focused as well. And I know I mentioned previously it's hard to sometimes plan so far in the future, but it's also good to also have some form of goals and dreams that inspire you to do things. So if I were to ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years, what would be your answer?
Jeez. Yeah. This is always a tough question, Chris.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So, I mean, for me, looking 5 years down the road, so I mentioned earlier, right, how for me it was going through university, there are early stages of my career, and keep in mind I'm only like 5.5 years into like the professional workforce, full time, everything like that. So I'm still quite young in my career. It's often been about keeping options open, looking for ways to expand the opportunities available to me. I think the path leading as it has done that for me very much, right? I've had a lot of different opportunities to get management experience, to get professional experience in different capacities and different competencies. Even still, now I think it's more about specialization for me. Now it's more about, okay, how do I look at the skills that I have and how do I bring them to a professional, formalized, structured, methodical level, right? So I mentioned before that it was the product manager role that I took, and now I'm in this product director role. When I say product manager for Infotech and for this product that we have, it's always had an interesting definition and connotation. It's not your typical software product manager where we're working with engineers as to how software is being developed and brought to final iteration. It is it's a service packaged as a product, right? But now we're looking at ways to do more product management, right? So I'm keeping this within the context of Infotech right now, but I'll expand in a second. And now, right now, for me, it's about specializing as to how do we actually mature what we're doing from a product management level, and how do I mature what we're doing from an operational level, so that I can create efficiencies from an operations perspective, but then I can also create more value than what we're doing on a routine structured manner right now from a product's perspective, right? How do we actually improve the product? What does that mean? What does that look like? And how do I create a space where my team's able to develop in that capacity as well? So, I mean, that's at least probably my focus for the next year or so, if not 2 years. And that's probably going to create more opportunities from a product lens as well for me. Professionally, more broadly, it's, to use your word, it's anchoring around IT professional services. Like that's kind of my industry. That's my space that I actually am gaining quite a bit of experience around. Now, how do I do more in that space beyond what I'm doing right now? How do I, excel past an operational perspective? How do I put myself in a position where I'm doing more strategic planning? I'm doing more, really strategic planning is kind of one of the anchoring thoughts for me right now. And, business strategy. From there, the professional scope of any one person's life, in my opinion, should only take up so much space, right? Like that's not the end all be all of my life. I enjoy the work that I do. I want to get better at it. I never think I'm good enough in that space, but it's always something to work at and to hone. But on the other side of that coin is my family, right? It's, how are we growing as a family? How am I setting up my family for success? I think those things end up taking the front seat. And then, my professional life is really a means as to how do we get there and how do we create certain types of freedoms for ourselves or certain types of fulfillment for myself, right? I happen to be in a role in an organization where there's a ton of change literally all the time. Change fatigue feels like something I'm constantly managing for within my team. And that also creates more opportunities, more challenges for me to grow in and to learn from and to develop in. But they'll probably reach a certain point where maybe fulfillment for me means something else beyond honing these professional skills. And maybe it'll take more of a kind of a form of the type of organization that I'm working for. Meaning maybe it's something more philanthropic. Maybe it's something with more of a direct mission in the world that I think is creating some good or developing some sort of good for a certain group or area or idea. Not that I think, IT professional services doesn't do that for some people. It actually does, make people's lives easier. It makes, you deliver really great experiences in a certain sphere of life that really matters for some people. I get a lot of fulfillment from that. But I want to bring it beyond that, I think. And I think that's kind of where my career is likely going to go. But we'll see what the family also needs to be set up for success. Right?
I like that. And whenever I have those sorts of conversation, I always try and speak from a lens of multi-dimensions. So when going through a lot of these exercises with mentees, we use an idea of a sphere or a wheel. So yes, your life should never just be professional. That should only be a certain percentage or a certain slice. There's family, there's somewhat what we refer to as charity or social aspects, friends, relationships, what else? Finances. So there's so many different pillars or pieces of the pie that you should be thinking of. So great that you've already started thinking about that. It's just one small portion, but how does that affect the whole? So awesome. I like multi-dimensional thinking and perspective.
I think that's crucial.
Yeah.
That's going to help you inform the decisions that you make in a much more holistic way. And success in a much more holistic way.
Right.
I'm getting all my worth and self-value from work. That's not going to be a good time for me or the people around me.
Right. And as you go throughout life, I'm finding each of those different pieces of the pie have a slightly different weighting, right? So, being early career, yes, your professional slice might be a lot more heavy weighted than family. But once you start having children, once you start getting married, then that family slice starts growing and that impacts other things. Maybe your professional starts to get a bit smaller. But then you start thinking a bit more, where's my social impact? Am I going to make some form of lasting impression in life? And you start thinking legacy, and it's an interesting journey. And I'm sure if I ask you a year from now, or even 5 years from now, that answer will be even more different. So I love that perspective. Really enjoyed this conversation, Erik. Thanks for all the valuable information that you've left. I'm sure that all the mentees are going to definitely find lots of value in what's been discussed.